Welcome, everybody. So this is the very first pilot episode of our, free art class. I'm doing a free weekly art class. This is the basics of digital painting. And every week on Thursdays, I think, Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern is where it started. Oh, is the event started? No, it's not. Let me hit the start event button somewhere in here. It's somewhere in here, right? Dustin, do you know how to start the event? Is it started? Oh, you got it. You started it. Okay, great. Did you already at everyone, or is it just been at the people who are RSVP'd? All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is episode 1 of the free class that I'm doing. It's the basics of digital painting. My plan is to do these every week. The current time we have it set up is for 5 p.m. Eastern. I hope that's a good time for everyone. And the plan is that every week we're going to meet here for an hour, and we're going to do a few things. We are going to go over some sort of basic lecture. We're going to have some, we're going to look over some homework, do some crits, have a little time for Q&A, and then I'm going to give you an assignment for the next week. And it's going to all go by pretty fast. With only 1 hour to cover a lot of territory, we're going to be brushing it over pretty light. We're only going to be able to get over so many crits every single week, just because I'm anticipating that with a free class, we're going to get a pretty full house. And so the number of people who are doing homework every week, there's going to be a lot of fellow student crits. And we're going to, I'm only going to be able to touch so many of them. The idea is that people are going to be able to get some crits. It's all going to be free. And then hopefully you'll be able to learn from seeing the ways in which I'm giving feedback to other people. And the assignments each week are going to be fairly simple as well. Last year, I had a habit of doing studies just about every day. This is a recording of one of them. This was study number 65, I think, out of 100 that I did. And I found it tremendously helpful. It was a great platform for learning beginner stuff. And even as somebody who's had a 20-year art career, this was my first time doing studies, and I got a lot out of it, and I've kind of missed it a little bit. So I want to be going over some photo studies some week. There's some basics exercises that I'm seeing other artists do that I'm a little jealous of. I want to try these things out because I've never done a lot of studies. I haven't spent time on fundamentals in a really, really long time. And so every week I'm going to go over the assignment as well and do it alongside everybody else. And, we'll have a little bit of a talk over the content the following week, whatever it is that we're focusing on. And because this is a basics class, I'll be available for questions to go over basic materials. And the hope is that over the course of this, we'll also develop a page on the huckleberry.art website for resources for people who are just jumping in. If you go to huckleberry.art right now, we have some basic digital resources there, like my brush pack and my gradient maps, but also like a simple tablet buying guide for people who don't own a digital tablet yet. And so I want to accumulate more stuff. Like I want to go over some basic stuff, like anything that I'm going to go over in a lecture. There's going to be the basics of digital painting. We're going to be able to capture some of that, and it's going to go up on YouTube for future people to be able to benefit from. And then also I'm going to be able to answer basic questions from you guys in the Q&A section, so that I know what to record tutorials for to add to the YouTube, so that somebody who's coming in a month from now, 6 months from now, there's going to be an even wider wealth of resources for them to jump in. So that's the plan. And so for today's first session, I just wanted to sort of set the agenda. And I want to take some questions and maybe use that as a platform for, doing a little bit of a demo today. And And then, we're going to, the assignment for this week is going to be doing a study. Thankfully, Dustin has been keeping up with putting resources on the Discord here. If you go to the Learning tab, there's a new homework channel. This is where the homework is going to be going. If you do the week's assignment, then you're going to be posting in here, and that's where we're going to be looking at it the following week. And then on here we have Today is the Day, which is a channel that is chock-a-block full of reference images. This is pretty great. So there is a fantastic collection of reference images to be able to do studies from that are already up here. I pulled one of them earlier, and so that's going to be the subject of this week's first assignment. This week's first assignment is going to be to do a photo study, spending as much time as you want on it, stylizing it however you feel like, using whatever tools you want. You can work digitally. You can even work traditionally if you wanted to. And let me just drop it in the chat right now. There's the photo study. It's a cat is a speaker. Hey, how's it going?
Hi, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. Just a quick question. So when trying to go and do a lot of shading, how do you go and get your work really smooth without having it kind of look really jarring with blenders? Or in a midline where you have visual texture with your brush strokes, but it's not pushed too far.
All right, let's talk about blending. This is one of my favorite fundamental things to go over. So I primarily use one brush. Very simple round brush. And I'm going to go over the properties really quick because the blending is a property that emerges from my brush. As you can see, I'm able to lay in color, and then I'm also able to blend it pretty well without having to switch my brush up here. The way that I blend leaves a little bit of a painterly mark. So it's not perfectly smooth blending, but you can get it pretty darn smooth if you massage it long enough. The way my brush is set up is that the pressure sensitivity is set to the size. And if you go to huckleberry.art, you can download my very, very small brush set that includes this as the primary brush. So the pressure sensitivity adjusts the size, and you can see that as the brush stroke goes back and forth over itself, it's got this you can see that the stroke is still kind of building up as it's going. That is a byproduct of the flow being turned down. Right now, the opacity is at 100%, hardness is 100%, but the flow is turned down to 10%. The spacing is turned down and the flow is turned down. The spacing keeps these kind of overlapping circles from being too predominant. It brings the circles closer together so that you don't see so many striations as they overlap. And then the flow is turned down so that it takes a little bit for the brush stroke to kind of build up to its full intensity. You can see that over a very simple mark, we end up with kind of an ease in and ease out on the brush stroke. This is what allows me to do a lot of my blending, because even at 100%, you can see we can get a little bit of a soft edge just through the directionality of the brush stroke. See, side to side versus up and down, we end up getting a different shaped mark, where up and down, you can see that the top and bottom are soft, while side to side, the sides are soft. And so without actually adjusting the hardness, and without having to go back and do something like smudging or smoothing of any kind, we're able to make softer marks just through the directionality of the way that we make a stroke. And then I will turn the opacity up and down using the number keys. And with the lower opacity, right now I've got it down to 40%. You can see I'm just sort of swinging my brush around so that I get this I'm trying to keep the soft end of the brush sort of pushing towards where we want to do the blending. And then with the Alt key, we can grab the in-between colors that emerge from this blending process and sort of just mush it around. So I'm able to lay down a color in its most intense spot, and then I'm able to kind of push it outwards and mush it away from wherever I'm laying it in. So if I wanted to create a highlight, I can figure out about how intense I want that highlight to be. And then I can grab color on the edge there and I can start to blend it in. And I'll usually start with a fairly high opacity, maybe around 80%, as I'm like laying in where I want stuff to be. And then once I want to smooth it down, I usually go down to between 30 and 10%. And it's all just off the one brush. And it works in black and white, it works in color. And it gives it, the reason I do it this way is because it provides a lot of control. Because even though all you're seeing me do is smooth stuff here, it's just as possible to create a hard edge with this brush or a thin mark. So if I want to start, if I want to have like a sort of in-between edge, one that is just like a little bit hard with a little bit of softness to it, or something that's fully smooth, fully soft, or something that has a very, very hard cut in it, or even like drawing a line through something, I can do it all with the same brush. And the end result is something that feels a little bit painterly because it leaves behind a mark that is kind of uneven based off of the natural motion of my hand, which makes things look painterly. It makes them look intentional. And I love that look. So I use this very simple brush that allows me to have a lot of control over the kind of marks that I'm making. And it doesn't require a lot of like practice or education in order to be able to use it. So this is, to me, the most simple tool in the digital painting arsenal. Typically people go with something a little bit different. They go with a brush that's got, that's more like this, where the brush sensitivity or the pressure sensitivity causes the it to be either lighter or darker. I don't like these kinds of brushes, not only because like the size and shape of them are kind of static, but also because it kind of it gives people the habit of like pushing really hard in order to try to get deep opaque colors. And that tends to wear my hand out. I get hand and wrist problems when I'm pushing too hard for too long. And so I really don't like the feel of a brush like that. And I know a lot of young people who have gotten serious like hand pain from grinding away with like a brush that's got that kind of opacity, sensitivity on the pressure. So I prefer the marks being made by the size flow brush more. And I always have. But it's a little bit of a preference thing, depending on what kind of... some people tend to go on the size flow side of things. Other people go on the opacity flow. For me, it's size flow all the way. But, some of you crazy people out there, you're going to go with the opacity flow round brush as like your round brush. But I urge you to try to see the light and join me on team size flow. Because if you think about it, this is how an actual brush works. Like if you drag just the tip of a paintbrush, you create like a thin line. And then if you mush it down, you mush the body of the brush into the page to create a wider mark. So to me, this feels like what a paintbrush would actually do. It's one of the reasons I like it. So thanks for your question. Is there anything
Thank you
else
so
I can
much.
clarify about that? I went over that really fast.
No, that was really helpful. And thank you.
All right, thank you.
Hello, sir. All right, so I'm actually not necessarily new to digital painting, but I am new to actually coloring in black and white paintings.
Sure.
What is your best advice when it comes to, example, studying skin tones and the face to get a more realistic feel and not this kind of bland look to it? Like I understand the rendering parts, but I just have an issue getting the right color, I guess you could say, or choosing the right color, even with a reference.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I see people struggle with a lot early on with color. And it's one of those things that I really want to create a lesson for soon. So sooner rather than later, I have a lesson I want you guys to do. The piece that I had as the reference as the headline image for this event was this study that I had done last year, which was one of my very favorite ones. And one of the things I really liked about this one was that it was a day where I chose to do surreal colors. So the actual reference to this is normal white light and with normal skin tone. But I specifically chose different colors than what was in the reference because, in reality, you don't actually need to get the colors right. It's not a matter of picking the correct shade of orange to be able to get like skin tone. It's a matter of like learning to recognize the subtle differences in color temperature. It's true universally, but the point where I think that people's brains most recognize that is when they're trying to paint skin, and you're so much more sensitive to human faces than you are to other things, and that's where you're suddenly realizing that you're missing something. This is the reason why even when you're sampling from a reference, you are still struggling, and it's like what all the colors are. You've heard of red, you've heard of orange, you've heard of yellow. Like, how come when you try to put them on the page, like it seems like it's always the wrong color? There's a different problem that you're not recognizing that's ultimately causing the issue, not the actual specific colors themselves. It's the relative relationship to the colors. A really good exercise to learn about that is to try to do something like this, where you are focusing exclusively on the relative difference of the colors and not on the specifics of the colors that are in the reference. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
What I recommend, it's like this is one of those things where once you see it, you've like seen the matrix code and you can start to see the world in a different way permanently. But it might actually take some repetitions in order to like start to notice it for yourself. And like it's something they teach fundamentally in traditional painting, but it takes a little longer to kind of come around to it in digital painting. So for every color, there's sort of a warm and cool variation of that color. So there's like warm reds and cool reds, warm blues and cool blues. You think of like maybe red is a warm color and blue is a cool color, but there's, let's see, a color temperature chart. We're not looking for like, what I was finding when I was looking at color temperature originally is like the colors of lights. But what we're looking for is something like this. You can see there's a lot of information online about art fundamentals when it comes to this subject. If you're not aware that it's an issue, then you don't know questions to ask and you're not going to find the right answers. And so find charts of like what's a warm color versus a cool color. How does one mix into the other? How does that affect your perception of color? That's the stuff that you really need to be digging deeper on to learn in order to start to notice that. And then once you have a little bit of a sense of it, what you realize is that the actual colors don't matter. If you are able to pick out what the relative difference of colors are, you can swap each of the individual specific colors out for anything else. And it becomes the superpower where you can start to play around with and like explore color space far beyond what is natural and realistic. It's very fun. So we're going to get into that as a specific assignment down the line, but I'm glad that you brought it up today because it's one of those things that I always love playing around with, and I noticed that a lot of digital artists haven't really discovered it yet.
Again, thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, thank you. And you guys don't need to call me sir. This is an example of how I was working to do my own studies. There's a lot of methods out there, classical methods on how to do studies like this. I've looked at very few of them. I just sort of was cobbling together little bits of advice here and there and otherwise just messing around with stuff. I would not worry if I were you and you're a beginner and like you are just going to try this stuff out. I would say go out of your way to make mistakes. I would not worry about performing at a very high level or being embarrassed about showing your homework. For this week, I want you to just dive in head first, do whatever you think makes sense to you. Get whatever result you're going to get, and if it stinks, then be happy that you participated and really enjoy the process of doing it, because hopefully any failures that you have are going to lead to you like getting feedback down the line and learning how to do it in a future study. Like your first study, if you haven't done any of these before, is going to stink. My first one that I did, having been an artist for 20 years, like actually kind of stunk. And I got way better at these over the course of 100 of them. So, if you could do one of them a day if you wanted to, if you really want to get intense about it. But for this class, I think it'd be cool to just do one a week. Chris is asking the big question here. How did you get so good at art without studying? I recorded a little rant about this, and we're gonna edit it and throw it on YouTube at some point. But it's I had to think about this because I was like, how come I've never studied and I turned out fine. The way I learned was by just making finished pieces over and over again, and I did a shit job at them over and over and over and over again. And what would happen is I would try to draw a guy, and I would draw him pretty bad. And then I would look up reference to try to figure out, well, if I don't know how to draw an arm, my arms look weird, the head looks weird, like the head doesn't sit on the shoulders in the right position, like what is it supposed to look like? And so over the course of me making my next piece, I would look to real life and I would look to references to try to figure out how to do it differently in order to make it correct. So I was doing some amount of research, but the research was never like a study of just like doing a photo study, doing fundamentals drills. It was always just making my next piece and then doing the research to try to make that piece as good as possible. And over the course of doing that for years, like the pieces got better one after the other. Just the repetitions of drawing, the mileage, the like interrogation of how to do this better just accumulated. And I was able to get good at it. And I was able to develop my own style by like just sort of doing my own thing. And that was my solution to like figuring out how to get good without studying. Though I think that if somebody were to do that, make imaginative finished work over and over again while also studying, they would probably get better faster. So while I managed to get there eventually, I'm not convinced that it was the best path. I think one of the mistakes that a lot of beginners make is that they worry about not studying enough and they only study. And they feel like they're never good enough to try to put their ideas on paper. And so I think that there's actually a big mistake that's out there that's very common where people are overstudying. We have this androgynous person in a jean jacket with floppy hair. I would say if you want to do the homework, the basics of the homework, do a study of this piece. If you want to do the homework Moorbacher style, I would say do the study, but also draw from imagination, no reference, an androgynous character with a jean jacket and floppy hair. Probably suggest do the study first and then wipe your brain clean and just work from imagination and make a character that has the same loose description as this one, not this person specifically, and include that along with your homework. So you have the study and you have your own imaginative drawing, and hopefully the imaginative drawing has been upgraded just a little bit through the process of the study. And so each week when I assign some sort of study, there's going to be some sort of other assignment that's going to be just draw something that is similar to that, because we don't want to end up in this hole where we're permanently studying in anticipation of some future art that we're going to make someday. We need to always be making something.
I guess it more pertains to splash art. So like,
sure,
you'll have like the exaggerated like shoulder plate over someone's arm, and then like that'll have a spotlight on it. Sorry, I'm like thinking off the cuff.
All right, so we got
and then those two things would have like a gradient, and you don't want the edges to bleed into each other.
Paintings, if you boil them down, are always going to be like a kind of patchwork of like gradients, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you can have a gradient that runs across multiple axes. Like, you can have a potato chip shape that curves up one side while also curving up the other. And so it can be a little bit challenging to figure out how the colors transition from one to the other. But, typically there's usually some transition points where if you look close enough, it is a series of gradients that aren't actually overlapping, but kind of butting up next to each other in subtle ways. But you're talking about overlapping edges.
Yeah. just because in a lot of art like that, or at least in my attempt to like study stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm trying to make like a clear edge, they usually end up like bleeding into each other.
Clear.
Or like there's so many layers that it's difficult to adjust them.
You mean like a clear
So-
material, like it's semi-transparent?
For example, let's just say that black stroke you have above, let's say that whole piece is armor,
Mm-hmm.
and then the sphere you have underneath it is skin.
Yep.
And you've accidentally made the skin like too light, and you need to go back and add a shadow. Like, how would you have that gradient integrate smoothly?
Well, one of the things is that I think that a lot of splash art gets wrong is it tends to do the mistake of like digital shadow overlays. Like this is something that I don't know if you ever watched those Corridor Crew videos about VFX Artists Explained. They explain how like whenever they add digital shadows on stuff, they always end up doing it wrong. Because you have this like, you have Harry Potter here. This is Harry Potter. And he's got a sorting hat on. And in the movie, they don't have a real hat on him. They have a CG hat. And so they have to cast a shadow over Harry's face. And they do it like this by darkening a portion of the skin. But this is not how light actually behaves. You're not actually going to have like the gradient underneath because the light that's creating this highlight is going to get blocked out by the shadow. And the reason it's not pure black is because there's, in addition to this key light that's creating this highlight here, you typically have fill light that comes in underneath. And you actually have a second light. And it's not coming from the same direction. And our brains recognize this. So when we see Harry Potter with the sorting hat where the highlights are all showing that he has a lit face, but it's like darker in parts, we get this weird dissonance where we're like, it technically looks like there's a shadow on his face, but it looks wrong. And we're not exactly sure why it's wrong, unless you're a VFX artist or like a painting expert. Here, we got a photo here of in the chat of Harry Potter with the shadow over his face. And it's one of those things where like, unless you are looking out for it, you might get it wrong. And I see this a lot in splash art where there's going to be like a blending mode over the top of something, like they've rendered the hell out of it, and then they're going through with like some sort of effect over the top, and they're trying to create a shadow, but they don't want to undo all the rendering they've just done. And so they have this thing where it's like it's getting darker, but it's not getting darker in the way that shadows actually behave. When you have these kinds of overlaps, there's discrete areas that are all behaving in subtly different ways. And they're all being, affected by different lights. And so when it comes to the edges of it all, I typically am sort of addressing these lights separately in my mind. And this gives me the insight to be able to, render the highlight created by the key light separately from, the way I'm thinking about rendering the fill light that's coming in underneath the shadow. And I'm treating them, distinctly from each other. And that's giving the impression of shadow in a way that comes from my painterly experience rather than trying to achieve it through a series of like digital painting hacks, which is extremely common in splash art these days. It's one of the things that I don't like about splash art personally.
It's going good. I think that what you just said was really, really awesome, especially for people who are less experienced with those ideas. I think there was an aspect of the question that is even simpler than this.
Yeah.
And I think it was also even just a layer organization and like how to paint when you've got like 40 layers and you don't remember which thing was the edge of the thing. And how would you give advice to somebody who's new to painting and digital painting, who's having a lot of those issues, like simple kind of like layer mismatching and all that?
That's a good point that you're bringing it up, because my workflow is that I'm always just on the top layer, and it's like, oh, I'm going to paint something on the hat. Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to paint something on the face. Okay, great. And like nothing's separated, and I'm just building them up as like layers of paint. And you
Lots of patience to do that.
And so here's the painting I'm currently working on, and this is what's happening is like as I'm making choices, like the a lot of my layers are simply just a ton of opaque brushstrokes that are sort of like the layers of paint on a canvas. And so if you isolate them, it's like almost like an X-ray where you just get to see that single layer of oil paint being applied to the canvas and nothing's getting separated. So it's like, oh, well, how do you address all these different overlapping things that have different edges? Like, what if something needs to have a soft edge, but it's also on a separate layer? And I'm like,
Yeah.
what do you mean separate layer? I'm just on the top.
Yeah.
So I'm-
To each their own, though. It's
Yeah.
interesting how your technique is like that, and some other people. My technique is like super digital, and I love seeing yours. It's very oil painting, and it really highlights your sensibilities. They come out very
Yes,
nicely because of that.
I identify as a digital artist, but I mean, I've always been a digital artist, but I've always attacked the process of painting more similarly to a traditional artist.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's like, hey, I'm the one teaching the class. We're going to be offering more free. I'm trying to rope people and more people to offer free classes. So if I can find somebody who has a style that's like way more like that, where they separate elements all out in separate layers, I'll have them do a free class and explain it. But like, I don't know anything about it. So
No.
It's anybody who's going to learn
Yeah.
from me is going to be presuming that this is the only way that it's supposed to be done. You know, like.
I think that's great, though. That's great to teach that traditional, original technique. So that's cool.
you.
Just wanted to say that I appreciate the shadow thing too, because that's super interesting. A lot of people don't pick up on that until much later.
Yeah,
So it's
and
cool
it has another little knock-on effect that I love, and you can see it a little bit here in this painting, is that like whenever you have a cast shadow, not only do you treat the direction of the lighting differently, but the color of the light tends to be different too. So it's like
Yeah.
the color and temperature tend to be very different. So it actually gives you the freedom to be able to pick really wacky colors and throw them into a shadow. And if you treat the way in which it's separated from the highlight in terms of its color and at the directionality of the lighting differently, you can actually make something look like a shadow, even if it's like very brightly colored. And like it gives you the opportunity
love
to
that.
fill the space of the canvas with colors and with variety and saturation and temperature. And this is something I see, again, not enough of in splash art, where shadows tend to get
Yeah.
really dark and really muddy. And it's very
Yeah.
much a different approach than a more classical oil painting like approach.
Yeah, I like the way you're talking about it, because it brings up this idea that like if you organize it correctly and you just group the areas, like the islands of value, they'll communicate what you want them to communicate, but like you can play with them. So that's cool. I'm gonna step down. I just wanted to like hear this, and I thought that what you said was really cool. So I want to
Well,
let you get back to it.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah.
But do you have any advice for someone who struggles to make art when they want? I feel like I struggle with just getting up and doing it, and I don't know if that's something I can get help with. That is a very, very good question. How do we choose to do things and then want to do them? Well, I think one of the there's a few intersecting issues here. A big one of them is just executive function. Like, how do we just choose to get up and clean our rooms or do the dishes? Or how do we do things we really don't want to do, like make time to do our taxes? When things are really important, they sometimes have an emotional weight to us that makes them hard to get to. And so if you really want to get better at drawing and you really care about drawing, sometimes that creates a kind of emotional barrier. It feels like a bigger lift than just, fucking around playing video games or whatever. Like, it's not mindless, it's intentional. And when we care about something and it's intentional, it can sometimes be a little bit of emotional labor to get going on it. There's a lot of strategies for that. So anything that you see online, it's going to be vary a lot from person to person. Anything you see online that's an anti-procrastination strategy is likely to work. The emotional resistance of getting going is the big part of it. Once you do get going, art tends to be the sort of thing that you sort of fall into, and like you commit to 15 minutes and then at the 15-minute mark, you go, I'm just going to go for another couple of minutes, and you find yourself 2-3 hours in, and you just have blown off a bunch of other stuff. You get in a flow state, and then it's game over. So I've found that if I can like set a time and a place and an agenda for the art, like I am after dinner, 6 p.m., setting up my workspace to do a little painting thing. And especially if there's other people involved, like, my wife is wanting to do this like gouache thing with me, and like, I don't want to let her down. I found that like getting involved with other people and being accountable to other people helps a lot. Making a time and a place and a specific task, like I'm not just going to in general paint, but I'm going to be doing this week's study, or I'm working on this particular personal project. Having the specifics of that stuff laid out helps a lot in terms of like not turning it into a generalized thing. Like, I'm going to become better at art. Like, it's like, I'm going to do this specific activity that is going to take this much time, that is going to exist at this time during the day, that is being done in this room with these tools. Turn it into a series of mechanical tasks to get going into the process. To be very specific about what you're going to do can help. I found that for me, externalizing a lot of the stuff, putting it onto a list, giving the list a deadline, giving the list like it's today's list. These are the things that are going to get done. And then at some point, I don't want to do them, but this is the time in which they get done, and I start working through them. I pick the one that's easiest to just get into the process and start moving. It's a difficult thing. As somebody who's like a little bit on the spectrum and has trouble with like executive function, I could definitely relate to like it's difficult sometimes to just choose to want to do something and get into it. But, it's like it's really different person to person. Strategies vary a lot. I really wish I could provide like super solid, do this and you'll be better forever. But all I can do is throw a bunch of pretty okay ideas at you and hope that one of them ends up being like the thing and takes off and makes a big change in your life. So good luck. But yeah, there's so many things I want to say to like address that question, because there are so many strategies to solve that problem. It is one of the biggest problems I find in like as a mature adult. How do we just choose to do and commit to do the things that we want to do? Maybe I'm just speaking for myself. It's so easy to get lost in so many different distractions and escapes and like avoidance behaviors. And we live in a world with phones and PlayStations and Fortnite. We all, as far as I can tell, everyone sucks at it. Like, so me sucking at it makes me feel like some amount of companionship with everybody else, except for those Sigma grindset guys. I don't know what the hell they're doing. I figure they're just lying to everybody. I think the people who project the sense that they're like, have it all worked out, I think they're all just lying. I think they're just editing out the parts where they don't live up to their own expectations. Yeah, I've met a lot of neurodivergent people on Discord. So there's a pretty large community of people who have executive function disorder on here that all have their own different coping mechanism. Sometimes for me, hanging out in a Discord chat has been my coping mechanism. It's worked out really well. Museri is asking, so many different things I want to improve, but I just end up leaving a ton of unfinished studies and unopened digital learning material. How can I organize myself with steps and not just end up having a bunch of okay-ish things? I'm going to talk from my own bias here on this. I'd say rather than trying to figure out the ways in which you are going to be the ideal artist, I say you just need to commit to figuring out how you can finish paintings. And it can be any painting. It doesn't need to be epic in scope. It doesn't need to be part of a personal project that's going to build your personal brand. It's literally choosing to do anything, choosing to do something that's easy, especially. Finding a painting that you know how to finish, you know how to start it, you know how to get to the middle, you know how to get to the end, and committing to doing that will give you a lot of insight as to like what kinds of things come naturally and easy to you, and that will help you develop your voice. And so like it sounds like I'm asking you to be lazy, and I would like to frame it as I want you to do stupid, lazy artwork in addition to whatever studies you're doing, because that will give you insight into what is easiest and most natural for you. And that will help you develop your voice. Wagyu asks, I just want to ask if it's really essential to dig deep into learning perspective or just basic knowledge about it is enough. I'm somebody who never got good at perspective. In this painting here, I created a simple perspective grid using a Photoshop hack, which I can demonstrate really quick because I brought it up. If you go to the shape tool, the the polygon tool in Photoshop and you turn the sides all the way up, I think it goes up to 100. Let's see, there's like and then if you go down to the settings here, there's like a way you could say make it a star. Like instead of a multi-shaped thing, this is a 100-sided polygon. But if you make it a 100-sided star, and then you can choose the indents of how much each side indents as a star and turn that all the way up to 99. This is a very obscure thing. You create this shape that is just a radial pattern of lines, right? And so if you just put this on a layer, it just draws a radial pattern of lines. And so you can just say like, okay, well, my horizon line's down here. I'm going to do one here. I'm going to do one here. Boom, perspective grid. Cool, right? I knew about this whole radial thing. Like if you ever want to get radial lines out of a spot for whatever reason, like as a reference point, you can use this tool. And this is making it as pixels, but you can also make it as a path or a shape. And so it'll stay there and it'll be like a pen tool shape instead. And so you can like leave it up but I usually just do it as pixels. So it'll make like a thing that will create a radial pattern. And then, but if you make two radial patterns across from each other, it'll show converging lines for perspective grid. There is a perspective tool. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'm working right now in Photoshop CS6, and so I don't know what features are in CC that aren't in like my old ass Photoshop. So I'm using a bunch of weird old broken versions. But so that is to say, like, perspective is something that you're never going to get away from 100%. But I never really learned it and got good at it, and I turned out fine. I just stuck to drawing mostly organic stuff. And like got just good enough at it to do the things I need to do. There was a great take from an artist on Twitch named Peacot, who I love Peacot stuff. Iris is saying same. There's a lot of professional artists that actually aren't that good at perspective. Peacot is somebody who's a programmer who recently taught herself to do art, who was briefly working as an artist at Riot before her job was downsized. And so she's a Riot artist who learned her stuff late in life. So I think it gives a really great qualification. What she did is she studied perspective on boxes to be able to intuitively draw the perspective of a box from imagination, so that like she could be just good enough at perspective where she never needed to do vanishing points and horizon lines and like really dig into it in a super technical way, and just like study the living hell out of perspective only as far as she needed to in order to just stop having to pay attention to it ever again because you didn't want to deal with it. And I was like, that's a big brain take. I love that take. So she's got a video for it on her YouTube. If you look up Peacot's YouTube channel, she's got a short where she goes over it. And I was like, damn, I got to start curating a little YouTube list of these takes that I love, because I would love to just be able to share these and let people speak for themselves, because there's a lot of really smart artists out there on the internet. So that's it for today. I'm going to go recap the assignment real quick and give instructions on how you can do the homework. The assignment this week is to do a study, and I uploaded it before. I'll upload it again. The study is going to be do a photo study like this, where you put the photo on one side of your screen or on another screen, and then you do a digital reproduction of that photo. You can work however you like. That photo is being uploaded into the chat again. And if you want to, what I recommend is that you come in next week. You're going to upload that on the homework channel. The homework channel is under the Learning tab here. At the top of the Learning tab, there's a homework channel. And upload your study there. And if you're feeling saucy, I say do an imaginative drawing of an androgynous character with floppy hair and a jean jacket. Bring both of them back here next week for Thursday's class. I'm going to look over some of those. I'm going to crit people. Anyone who wants to pop in on the mic and talk to me about their experience, I'd love to talk to you guys. And hopefully me talking to whoever gets featured is going to be educational for all of you that are just working on it at home. Feel free to crit each other's stuff or ask for crits. Feel free to ask for crits inside the homework channel. Feel free to use it for discussion. And I'm looking forward to seeing what y'all come up with. Have a good one. Be good. I'll see you then.